What are some of the international teams you can think of? Perhaps it's the notorious FaZe clan, such a star-studded lineup with very talented individuals. Maybe it's a team like Mousesports that has been struggling for the majority of 2019, but at the very end of the year, they managed to turn the corner and became a contender for titles. Maybe it's our latest contender, G2, a French team that has now become an international team by bringing in Hunter and Nexa from Team Crazy. These are just a few international teams that are there in the top of Counter-Strike. They have made their own big strides and achieved their own level of success. Yet not that long ago, back in 2015, making an international team like a FaZe clan, like a Mousesports, seemed to be a questionable idea. Their eligibility to contend for the top even laughable for some. But the CSGO community would have to reevaluate their opinions on the matter with a little team called Kinguin. At the start of Global Offensive, teaming up internationally didn't make a lot of sense, nor was it a financially viable option to have individuals from vastly different continents like NA or EU competing in one team. If anything, it was the Europeans that could attempt to build such rosters, but very few even tried. The rosters that would be forged wouldn't last long. One such team was a group of professionals who joined forces for just one event. With names like Kenny S, Neo, Taz, and Apex in attendance, all the while supported by their fifth player Overdrive, this Franco-Polish-Russian mix competed under the name Nostalgia in the 2013 Prague Challenge event. The $10,000 Prague Challenge event didn't attract teams like Very Games or NIP that were the cream of the crop of the early Global Offensive days. It did, however, bring Na'Vi in attendance, some of the best players from Source and Nexus competing, so the LAN wasn't stacked, but it had some formidable opposition. Because the LAN was an open bracket one and anyone could attend from all over Europe, the early stages were incredibly easy for Nostalgia. You can see that looking back at some of the videos at the time, this team's communication is somewhat more akin to your typical matchmaking experience than how proper roster of professionals should be outputting information.
You got the bomb! Yeah!
Yet somehow this ragtag group of players with smiles on their faces defeated Rattlesnake's team in the semifinals. In a more shocking matter, the team even defeated Na'Vi in a thrilling best-of-3 grand final, an incredible achievement for just a one-time mixed team. A group of players just with their raw skill, sprinkled in with some basic teamwork and communication, just won a tournament against a proper team. Yet this little experience that Nostalgia showed us was just a glimpse of what international teams can do. However, it would only be 2 years later that a proper international team would be built for real. To understand the creation of Kinguin, we must realize the position in which the players were in. The two main players, in fact, that spearheaded the creation of this team. Mike Lella had just recently played in NIP. During his 3 months with the team, he played in the grand final of a major, the 4th consecutive for NIP, and that was the first proper LAN event that he competed under the NIP banner. He finished 2nd in 2 international tournaments, won the title in Asus ROG, and finished 5th to 6th in Iowa's Pantamera as his last event. After this brief stint with the Ninjas, he was kicked off from the team, and he couldn't really go anywhere. He cannot join NIP. Fnatic was on the brink of becoming one of the best teams in CSGO's history at the time, and going down to a lower Swedish team would be quite the downgrade. As for Scream, he was in a similar boat to Michael Lille. He wasn't part of the best French teams like LDLC or Titan. In fact, where he was playing in Epsilon, the 3rd best French team. As the 2014 major came nearer, disaster struck the scene. Titan's KLE and Epsilon's SMF were both banned for cheating through Valve's anti-cheat software. Not only that, neither team would be able to participate or fill in stand-ins for the event due to the official Valve ruling. As Epsilon tried to rebuild the roster the following months, another disaster struck Scream and his team. GMX, now former member of Epsilon, announced publicly that his teammates were involved in match fixing. According to him, his teammates threw a game against the Spanish team over gaming as they were underdogs on CSGO Lounge. But GMX claimed that Scream wasn't involved in the fix and that he wasn't even aware of the circumstances taking place, thus he wasn't banned. What did occur, however, is that Epsilon still dropped the team and Scream was now left teamless. In April 2015, reports started circulating of Michaelella and Scream being part of an ambitious roster project. One of the initial ideas was to bring in Skadoodle and Hiko to join these team. As we know from history, these players were supposed to be part of the NA Dream Team with former iBuyPower players AZK, Swag, and Dazed. But due to the match-fixing scandal in early 2015, AZK, Swag, and Dazed were banned from competitive play, and Skadoodle and Hiko had to look for other options. They were contemplating of the move to Europe, but eventually decided not to join Michaelella and Scream. What ended up happening is that Hiko joined Nylum and Skadoodle joined Cloud9. This meant Michaelella and Scream had to look for other options. One of the players they were looking into and was supposed to be part of the roster initially was in fact Norwegian player Rain. He was an up-and-comer at the time and seemed to be a talented individual that could propel this roster. Then he picked up Huiten, that would have been the in-game leader for this team. And the fifth player they decided to go for was Portugal's best player Fox to round out this team, and that's the initial Kinguin 5. This type of team was truly the first of its kind in global offensive. In the past, you would have players from neighboring countries playing with each other as they could more or less speak a similar tongue, or maybe they even knew the language. That was the case for Guardian playing in Na'Vi and for Kerrigan playing in Mousesports. But this was the first attempt to build a team from scratch with different nationalities, and every single player would have to speak a foreign tongue. That's why this team was dismissed by many pundits and community members. Remember, this is a team where Scream's and Michaelella's stock was still pretty high, but as Pasha Baseps put it,
you asked me about Kinguin and I answer you, what we talking about? My friend, new Kinguin team, my friend, they have no chance, to be honest. No chance, no chance.
But for good reason. Michaelella later admitted in an interview with Thorin,
but yeah, that was so weird. Like Fox, he could barely talk English. We could still communicate in game, but it was most likely B, A, go B, defuse, plant, you know?
With communication being such an integral part of the game, Counter-Strike, how on earth could this team manage to achieve success even though they have some pretty big names on it? This initial 5-man Kinguin roster didn't set the world on fire. If anything, they were rather underwhelming. Taking a look at some of their performances of online play, it wasn't suitable for the caliber of players that were assembled in this team. But the great thing about having an international roster, it only becomes a matter of changing a few pieces and then you can actually build a functioning team. The first move they did was the removal of Huiten and adding Swedish Dennis into the mix. This was a great roster move because once it took place, the roster slowly but surely started building up their credibility in the international scene. Their first LAN event together was the Face It League 2015 Stage 2 Finals in Valencia. They were placed in a pretty difficult group. They had to go up against Cloud9, Na'Vi, and VP. In the initial best-of-1 game against Cloud9, they lost it. Nothing too unexpected there. But then they had to go against VP as they lost their opening game against Na'Vi. It was a very close best-of-3 encounter. In the very first map on Trade, which went to a double overtime, we got to witness one of the most amazing clutches of the year performed by none other than Rain.
Still a 2v4. If he just stays alive, he should have run into T-spawn and just waited for that bomb, and that would have been a big issue. But now it's Rain and Michaelella 2v4 here, and Michaelella going to go down eventually. Neo to finish it off, and it doesn't look possible here. Rain gets 3 kills though, and now 1 bullet left on Patrick gets the quad kill. Are you kidding me? Rain, he picks up every single one and takes it to overtime. That is unreal.
Even though they lost the first map, Kinguin managed to bounce back on the second one, winning thus too. In an incredible fashion, not only did they manage to win the third map cash, but they managed to do so in a convincing manner. They 16-0'd their opponent's VP and absolutely destroyed them. Even after such a bombastic victory, they still couldn't make it out of the groups. They lost it to Na'Vi. And from here on out, the ball started rolling. Gradually, the team would start winning more and more games, and they would continue on improving. In the next few months, the team managed to achieve one of their biggest accomplishments. First of all, they managed to qualify to ESL 1 Cologne, one of the majors in the Counter-Strike major cycle and one of the biggest events of the year. They did so by qualifying all the way from the online stages through the European main qualifier and then to the major itself. Even though initially they took a loss to the Brazilian squad of Luminosity, they managed to bounce back by winning against the Australians of Immunity 16-13, and in a more shocking manner, they even defeated Cloud9 16-13. That's meant they were now in the quarterfinals. Here, they had to face the Danish TSM, which the Kinguin players didn't really stand a chance, but they did retain their legend spot for the upcoming major, and their second biggest achievement was being able to win Gaming Paradise. Now this is a bittersweet victory. Even though they won the LAN, beating teams like Titan and Navi in the process, Gaming Paradise is regarded as one of the worst LAN events in CSGO's history, with computer parts straight up missing, players' passports just being taken away, and even some individuals suffering from food poisoning. So this victory definitely holds a lot of caveats, and it is a bittersweet one. Even though there were some issues communicating with a player like Fox, like Michael mentions in the interview, clearly it didn't stop them from finishing 5th to 8th at a major, winning a LAN event, and eventually being a solid team in the top 10. So what was the problems? What were some of the main issues for this team? For starters, even though they were able to communicate in English, it is important to note they learned it from communicating in the PUG environments and faced it in the ECA, so in that regard, communication is not a big issue. The bigger problem is when you have to communicate on a more higher level, when you're playing in a team environment, when the communication has to be more intense, it has to be more precise. That was one of the main issues this team had to tackle. If you take a look when they were playing on the T side on a lot of the maps, they would really struggle on them. They would go to their default setups, they would hope for the individuals to find the opening frags, or maybe just go for a straight up execute. They weren't the team that they would wind down the clock, wait for their opponents to use the utility, and then they would go in for the push. This was a team that was playing on their individual prowess, and that is to be expected. That's also one of the main reasons they would play maps like Cache, their most played map, Dust 2, and Mirage. Some of the more easier maps to grasp in Counter-Strike. They would not touch Cobblestone whatsoever, and they would very briefly touch on maps like Train or Overpass. An interesting fact as well, one of their least played maps was in fact Inferno. But during their run with the Kinguin organization, they managed to win Inferno 9 times out of the 9 times they played, so they finished it with a 100% win rate even though they didn't play the map too often. The second biggest problem for this team is that it was a roster with a star-studded lineup. When you have a roster like this with these very skilled individuals, not everyone is going to get a taste of the limelight. So in this team, one of the biggest weak links was Fox. If you take a look at some of the statistical data, Fox is definitely not playing up to par to some of his other teammates like Scream, Rain, Dennis, or even Michael. But you have to look back at some of the positionings Fox was playing. A lot of times he was playing the rotator, or he would be one of the second players on a bomb sites, not the main anchor. His main goal would be to try to throw in flashes for his teammates to go in for peaks, and he would be the player with the op that would play in a very passive manner. He wouldn't really go for the aggressive plays, and when he would go for such plays, those would be very few and far between. So he wasn't really considered as a prominent aggressive operator in that sense. So definitely his statistical data wasn't up to par to some of his other teammates. But his other teammates, let's talk about those real quick because they had some great performances under the Kinguin banner. For example, a player like Scream, he managed to be the best player in this roster by far. He was able to revitalize himself back in the French teams. He was a very impactful player. He would find opening frags, but he was also a very good bomb set anchor. And this is one of the main things we have to understand. Where they failed on the T side, Kinguin managed to give tenfold on the CT side. This is really where the members would get the must-win rounds. They would be able to win those engagements because now their individuals wouldn't have to focus so much on communication, just on popping heads. Remember, the notorious 16-0 game against Virtus Pro and Cache did take place just because Kinguin had an amazing 15-0 CT half. Ultimately, Kinguin managed to prove a few things. Being cast away from your local scene does not mean the end of a playing career. If anything, this exodus is an opportunity to prove your worth with fellow misfits and try to achieve big. In the case of Scream, he turned the corner in 2015 and was yet again part of subsequent French shuffles. For a player like Dennis, he was noticed in a team like Kinguin. He was picked up by Fnatic, and the team managed to win 6 offline events in a row with the addition of Dennis. And of course, what we've learned from Team Kinguin is that international teams can work. They have now become a lot more prominent in Counter-Strike, and we have more than a few teams that bear this tagline of being international. They can achieve big, they can win tournaments, and they can even be the #1 team in the world. The only question we have right now, can an international team be as dominant as Fnatic, as NIP, or as Astralis? Only time will tell, and let's see if that would be the case.